Welcome to The Flock from Nurtured Nest. I'm Katherine Dunn, founder, early childhood educator, and mom of two young girls.
And I'm Courtney Miller, co-founder, registered nurse, and IBCLC, as well as a mom of two young boys.
The Flock, our podcast for parents, will bring you up-to-date birth and parenting research that corresponds with our on-demand parenting classes,
ensuring you are ready to take on each new adventure in building your nest.
Hello, Nurtured Nesters. I am Courtney, and I have a very special guest here today. This is Dr. Trill. She's actually local to us here in the Triangle area. She just moved within the last year or so from Idaho to join us in the Triangle to kind of further her research, and super excited to have her locally to us now. We have been Instagram friends for some time. I mean, we were just talking, we did a live like 2 years ago on Instagram is kind of when we started our relationship, and then she moved here, which has been so fun. So I am going to turn it over to Dr. Trill because she will introduce herself better than I can. So Dr. Trill, if you can introduce yourself, tell us about what you do, what we're going to be talking about today.
Absolutely. First, thank you so much, Courtney, for having me. It is an honor and a pleasure always to talk to you. And yes, absolutely mind-boggling that it has been that long. But so excited to be in the Triangle, as you mentioned. So my background, I am a molecular biologist by trade. So I have a PhD in cellular molecular biology. And I'm an Operation Iraqi Freedom veteran. I'm a Pat Tillman scholar, and I'm currently serving in the North Carolina Army National Guard, my 17th year, which is also crazy.
Gosh.
What is happening?
What?
So with that, what's really fascinating about my journey is that when I was in my last year of grad school, we started our family, which was a fun time to have a baby, right? You're writing your dissertation and trying to finish school, having a baby.
Yeah.
And she ended up having very severe food allergies. And unfortunately, like many journeys along breastfeeding and food allergies, it took a long time for us to figure out that that's what it was. And so there was a lot of suffering of, she was inconsolable for many weeks. Eventually, we led to her being completely covered in eczema from head to toe, and then the bloody stools came. And by the time we were admitted to the hospital, she was only a few weeks old. She was completely covered and so bad that it was now weeping and infected. Her skin was.
Oh my goodness.
And all that came out of her little body was blood. Like I remember having her on like a one of those like changing mats, right?
Mm-hmm.
The
like the
plastic
Chuck's
ones.
pad. Yeah.
Yeah. And like having taken off the like cover to the mat and just like having her be there naked because all that was coming out of her was blood and she was miserable. And I say all of those things and like oftentimes, especially as parents, we're like, oh my God, like
absolutely.
Yet when I took her in, and every time I took her in, and I took her in over and over and over again, I would continue to really be dismissed, even though you could easily see something was very wrong. And at one point, I was told to maybe consider removing cow's milk protein from my diet. And even as a protein expert, literally my whole background, getting my PhD and before, all of my research was on protein analysis. And even as a protein expert, I had no idea. I had no clue that something that I ate, like cow's milk, could end up in my breast and elicit an allergic response in my baby. And so I started an elimination diet process. She spiraled. And there was a moment in the midst of all of this where we're admitted to the hospital, and the medical provider that walked in told me that she was shocked that I was breastfeeding my baby when she came in because I was poisoning my baby.
Ugh.
And that was really, really so incredibly hard for me to hear. And
because we don't have enough mom guilt anyways.
Right. Not enough
everything
tacked on. So let's go ahead and just add to that. And at the end of this hospital stay, we were told that yes, she has some kind of food reactivity. We can't test her because of the type of reactivity it is and how young she is. So my only option was to switch to a hypoallergenic formula. And while I am so appreciative that I could give her something at that
Absolutely.
stage,
Absolutely.
I also was in a space of, okay, well, I do want to continue my breastfeeding journey if I can.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other shoe fell, which was also this hypoallergenic formula costs $50 a can and will only last a few days. And I was a graduate student. Like, we didn't have extra funds.
Yeah.
So I literally went from feeding my baby something that hurt her to not being able to afford to feed her at all.
Yeah.
Which is crushing.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I began to ask the medical providers around us, is there any possible way, any stretch of the imagination that I would be able to create hypoallergenic breast milk? I had no idea what I was talking about. I was just like, if you can do this with formula, can I do it too? I don't know. Can I, like, am I going to go make a manufacturing plant? What does this look like?
Yeah.
And the answer was a hesitant, like, maybe, I don't know. We don't know what she's reactive to. So here's just a laundry list of things. This might help. This might not. Try taking these out of your diet and see what happens. And I did that. And I was able to successfully breastfeed her for a year.
Amazing.
Which was my goal.
Yeah.
And when I say successfully, I mean that in the way of I was able to reach that goal. Less successful as it related to my mental and physical health. And so I dealt with a lot during that time, partially because of, as you mentioned, that guilt and shame. And also partially because of all of the misinformation that I was given about timing for how long something would be in my breast, and that back of my mind, person saying you poisoned your baby. There's a lot to untangle there.
Absolutely.
And fast forward to, my second daughter being born, she started presenting with similar symptoms. She has a different form of reactivity, but she started presenting with symptoms very young. And this time around, I really popped my head out of the sand and was like, all right, where are the people and the resources and the research? I'm at a grad school now. Somehow I graduated. I don't know how that happened. I don't remember.
Yeah.
Where are all the people, right?
Yeah.
There should be like an army to help me do this impossible thing. And I told my husband that, I won't make it. I'm not going to survive another round of this. And at the same time, in all of the irony in the world, I was working for a dairy processing facility, running their lab, which is just like top shelf.
Yep.
Super funny because dairy is the very first thing that we tell parents to cut. It's the most common thing. And I was the quality manager, which means that, like, if somebody complained about our product, it was my job to like go taste it. And so amongst lots of other things, I had lots of jobs, but so you don't know life until you've like put cottage cheese in your mouth and then like swirled it around and then spit it back out and then rinse your mouth out because your baby has food allergies.
Yeah, like you can't.
I can't eat this. I can't eat the millions of pounds of food I'm creating every day.
Yeah.
Running their lab. And I learned that the food manufacturing industry, especially the dairy industry, has a simple little test that would allow us to determine if we accidentally cross-contacted allergens in our facility. So if you think about like a big piece of equipment, a big vat, for example, if they're running soy milk on that equipment and then cow's milk, they have to prove to auditors and the FDA that they didn't accidentally get those two things crossed because they're a top allergen. And I had that really stereotypical moment of like, what if? Like, what if I ran into a closet and put some breast milk on this thing? Like, what would happen? What would happen? And so I did because, as you do. And it didn't work. And so I contacted the company and was like, why doesn't this work? And they were like, why did you put breast milk on it?
Like, first back up and why?
Wait a second. You did what with our test? And that began the conversation of, okay, this doesn't exist for women, but it exists for cows. And I'm upset about that.
Yeah.
And as I dug further, the things that I found that were so valuable that led me to starting a whole company, which was not the goal initially, was one, the fact that this test was so easy. It's a simple, like a pregnancy test. It's very easy. If you could do it at home.
Mm-hmm.
Two, that I was in the trenches of my second food allergy journey and was just the thought of how much it would change my life if I could test my breast milk at home and just know what's in it, an ingredient deck for the boob. That I started Free to Feed, and in the midst of that, and in the midst of getting grant funding, and I was doing both at the same time. I think for about 2 years, I worked full time for this dairy processing facility while running this company and getting it off the ground. And they were very supportive. So shout out to them.
Yeah, awesome.
And in the midst of that, I also found that a lot of the information that I was told that made my journey so hard back when my oldest was born was incorrect. Not true, not based in science. And so then the anger kind of, bubbled back up, and all that guilt and shame. And in the midst of that, that's when I started speaking up and speaking out about the misinformation, trying to change the narrative behind this, trying to give parents a space where they could be human and still loved and have empathy and support through this journey, because it's so hard.
So hard.
And that's been kind of the journey that led to Free to Feed. We are now 4.5 years into this madness.
Yes.
My youngest is 4.5 years old, which is a fun way to be able to tick how old my company is, because we started right after she was born. And along the way, we have gotten clinical trials and grant funding for them. We have really, I think, done a lot of work to start to change that narrative about whether or not you can breastfeed through food allergies and what it looks like. And then we're very close to launching our first test kit. So it took time, because the reason why it didn't exist yet is because no one up until this point had looked at what does the protein look like in your breast specifically, because it's a very small portion that actually transfers to your boob. And so we had to know that first and then be able to detect it. So we've done that. We've made the first detection kit, which is so incredible. And I have learned way more than I ever planned to about the startup world and everything else, and social media. I did not know that I would be using my PhD to dance to booby facts on the internet. But here we are.
Here you are.
That was a really long diatribe, but I think helpful to kind of lay a foundation of what in the world Free to Feed is and what we've been up to.
Yes. So before we get too much into, there's some questions that I already know the answer to, but I know I want our listeners to know. So Courtney, have gone along this journey. Dr. Trill has led me through my second journey with my second little boy that we figured had an egg intolerance. And so, me texting her hey, can you look at this poop picture? And can you look at this rash? And can you do this? And all along the way of her, the biggest thing, and it gives me chills talking about, but I know I would text you and I'm I messed up. I accidentally ate something. And you're it's okay. It's going to happen. Just having that supportive voice, I think, is what, us moms just need. We need that support to know that, it's okay. We'll get through this. And it doesn't mean that, everything that you've done for the past however many months is just wasted now. So I just want to say before we get too much into this, because we're going to talk about kind of some things to look out for and all of that, but just know that there is someone in your corner, and her name is Dr. Trill, and she's got a team. If you don't specifically work with her, because she is busy in this world of doing these test strips, which is so amazing. But just know that there is now help for mamas and parents that are struggling with allergies, and it does not mean your breastfeeding journey has to be finished. And I can see it on the other end now. Now my little boy he's grown out of that, and I am able to successfully eat eggs. But we went through several months there where I couldn't have egg or dairy because we thought it was dairy. And so it's a very long journey, but there are people now that can help us, which is so, so amazing. So some things I want to talk to you about today to tell our listeners. So, we've kind of talked about allergies and breastfeeding and the protein and everything. So what if if a mom comes and says, my pediatrician said my baby has a dairy intolerance, I need to cut dairy. What are some things, and I know I learned this on our first chat, what are some things symptom wise that we look for that could be more of a latching issue and more of just like a foundational breastfeeding versus a true allergy? So let's kind of dive deeper into that so that moms know, parents know what to look out for.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think it's so very important to look holistically at baby and at the parent because there can be multiple things happening at the same time. Oftentimes we're just that lucky, right? We're like, yeah, I have food allergies and this and this and this. Or many times families will be automatically told to remove X, Y, or Z instead of deep diving into like, is there another potential root cause to this problem? So the most common, I think, that we see at Free to Feed, and I'm sure you see this too, is the confusion between, is this food reactivity issues or is it an oral restriction or latch problem, right?
100%.
That's the very top shelf, because when we have any kind of latch problem, right, and that can be just a poor latch in general, that can be just there's a plethora, right? Just a laundry list of things that can lead to having latch issues. Everything from supply to anatomy and all the things in between can lead to latch issues. And when we have latch issues, that little is often intaking way too much air. Aerophagia, snazzy word for that. And what that leads to then, often for these littles, if you're like taking in so much air, if we think of it as like ourselves, if we were chugging water and while we're doing so, we're also like getting in big bubbles of air, taking in a ton of air, we would probably have some reflux, right? We would be bringing some of that back up. We may even like actually spit up and bring a lot of it. Here you go. You can have that back. So reflux issues, also a food allergy like sign,
could be.
Right? Could be. It also can cause gas and tummy troubles, also a food reactivity sign. It could cause really crazy diapers coming out of the back end of your baby, also potentially a food allergy sign, right? So you can see here where
there's a lot of overlap.
There's so much overlap, and so it can be really confusing. And also, if baby has those bubbles and those tummy troubles and the gas, they're also probably not going to be happy about it, and they're probably going to tell you, and there's going to be sleep disturbances and fussy, right? So there's a lot of overlap there. And when we're working with families, I think the main takeaway there is to keep that in mind, right? That when we look at a list of symptoms for a little, that one, any child can have any combination of symptoms, and there is no like one thing that says you don't have a latch problem or you don't have a food allergy problem.
100%.
Unfortunately, I wish that was a thing and it would make our lives easier. Instead, what we need is to bring in the right professionals that can help you with both. And oftentimes what that looks like is addressing the easier, quite frankly, like thing to identify first. Now, oral tethers are not easy to navigate, but you can get in an IBCLC such as yourself that can say, yes, we have some kind of latch problem. What's the next steps? How do we fix it? And see if there's impact there before we start jacking people's diets. Because as a mama who has been on elimination diets for 2 years of her life, like that's not fun. Let's not do that for funsies. So when we see littles though that have maybe those symptoms that we mentioned that are really common for anatomical issues or latch issues, and other things, right? So if we get into the realm of like, we have bloody stools, or we also have eczema, or we have like projectile vomiting. So there are some symptoms that are a bigger red flag for me. That's like, oh, it's likely we're dealing with food reactivity. Now, it's important to note that like you could have both, right? And it's also important to note that you may find that you have oral tethers and that relieves a vast majority of the issue. And eventually we get to the point of food. There's also families who the symptoms are so intense that like we don't have time to do one and then the other,
For sure.
right?
Yeah.
So we may do them at the same time. We may say like, we need to get to happy, healthy baby for lots of reasons.
Some way.
So some way, right? And then on the back end, we're going to figure out how we did it.
Sure.
And that's not fun, right? But eventually at that point, we're kind of like throwing everything at it and then coming back after to say, okay, what was this? Let's open the diet. Let's figure out exactly what happened.
Yeah. And for an example there, relating it back to my situation with my little one, his was not the standout blood in the stool. He had eczema, really was his biggest thing. He wasn't cranky. He wasn't fussy. We had dealt with the oral tie. I knew he had one. We got it revised. But he, around that like 8 to 10, 12 week mark, he got it was just this rash. It was kind of like this newborn rash that I just couldn't ever get rid of. I was doing all the creams, I was doing all the things. And then it occurred to me and I'm like, So I texted Dr. Trill and I was like, hey, and she said, with my history of probably my first, had some things going on, which we eliminated dairy. I'm not even sure if that was his true thing. I don't even know what was going on with him. Because again, like we didn't know. We did not know. There wasn't a ton of stuff out there. Dr. Trill wasn't in her, I had not met her and she opened my eyes to so many things. But, for my instance, it was okay for us to kind of go a slower route because there wasn't anything like he was gaining weight fine. He wasn't having bloody stools. He wasn't having projectile vomiting. Like he wasn't having these big red flag symptoms that it was okay to kind of like, okay, let's just go through this slowly and kind of figure out. And then we figured out a trigger. But yeah, exactly. If your baby is having, the standout things like bloody stool, and especially all that comes with that, like not gaining weight and, and not thriving, then yes, we probably do need to get you on a fast track and then go back and figure out, okay, so what worked versus the latter. So that's really, really helpful. That is so helpful to me and my distinguishing things. I'm like, okay, we could have an allergy here, but let's not do too many things at once because then we really don't know which one worked. So if we do kind of have these more subtle symptoms, then we can kind of take our time with it. So you already answered my, when can it be more of a latching issue versus a true allergy? We already kind of talked about the symptoms to look out for. So now let's move on to how common are allergies. And because I talk to so many moms that they're, oh, my doctor told me that I need to eliminate dairy because my baby has gas. And I'm like, is that their only symptom? And they're like, yes. And maybe some spit up or something, but no blood in the stool, no projectile, no rash, nothing like that. And I'm like, okay, let's dive deeper into this. So let's talk about how common are food allergies, and then also the big myth of how long those allergies stay in your breast milk, because I know it's getting better. People are realizing it's not as long as we previously thought, but some people are still told that they have to discard their milk for so many weeks because the allergen is still in it. So I want you to kind of dive deeper into that and talk about like what happens in the gut, because I know that that's always like a light bulb for me when I tell parents.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what's really fascinating as we look at like prevalence, right? As we look at prevalence of food reactivity, I think what is first helpful for families is to lay out what is actually happening, right? Like what's going on in their baby's body. And so when we have a little who has these type of symptoms and that laundry list of like primary symptoms being the reflux, the vomiting, the mucousy stool, bloody stool, diarrhea, constipation, eczema, rashes. And then the secondary symptoms of like sleep disturbances, failure to thrive, colic, things like that. When we look at those types of symptoms, what's really fascinating is that those just recently received diagnostic codes. And so, for example, bloody stool is the actual like diagnosis for that for an infant is called allergic procticulitis, typically. Or sometimes we may have littles who have what's called food protein induced procticulitis syndrome, or FPIES. And so that we're getting these new diagnoses, which is wonderful and exciting because it can really help to give it a title, right? As opposed to like your baby's body doesn't like this. So, but the downside to it as well is that even though we've been studying these things since like the 50s and 60s, the fact that they didn't get a diagnostic code until 2017
Like what?
is egregious.
Yeah.
Like, excuse me. So because of that, there's a lot of misunderstanding about what they are and what they aren't. And so these types of reactivity that we most often see for infants are what's called non-IgE mediated food allergies. So they are an allergy, and that's actually a good thing. And so when we're looking at the body and we think of a food allergy, most often you and I probably think of like stereotypically like person has hives and goes into anaphylactic shock and needs an EpiPen and they go to the hospital because they had a peanut, right? Like that's where our minds usually go. That type of allergy is called an IgE mediated allergy. And it's only called that because of the type of pathway in the body that it takes, right? And IgE antibodies sees the food, loses its mind, we end up in the hospital, right? Or similar. Now, what is interesting in these new codes, these new diagnoses, is that wonderful, lovely scientists like myself decided to label them as like everything but that, everything but IgE, because we don't fully understand them yet, right? We know that it's a different response. We know that it's happening through cells, not through those antibodies. And so they're just lumped into non-IgE mediated food allergies. So the interesting thing when we talk about prevalence then is that there's a huge disparity between what's actually diagnosed and what's parental reported. And when we dig into the research behind this, on actual diagnosed, it's like 2 to 8%, right? And that's of infants experiencing food allergies. And that's because in order to get a diagnosis, you have to have a test to do said diagnosis. And there are tests for IgE mediated food allergies, right? We can do a skin prick test or blood test because it specifically looks for that IgE response. There is 0 tests for the non-IgE mediated food allergies. So there is no clear diagnoses and tests to be had for this entire other subcategory of food allergies, which is much more common to happen in this population. And then they outgrow them, just like yours did. Hallelujah. That's the beauty of a non-IgE mediated food allergy, is that like we can't test to determine exactly what it is they're reacted to yet, but they're going to outgrow it, which is very bittersweet because it's like, darn it, I can't just like easily test and know. It's also very bittersweet because since the child is outgrowing, it's not something that's received enough research attention, right? Like, oh, they'll just outgrow
like,
it. Just
when
wait.
does it happen?
Just wait. So when we talk about prevalence then, the research shows that parental reporting in scientific publications is anywhere from 19 to 35%.
Which is crazy different than that earlier number.
2 to 8%. Yeah, exactly. So different. And the couple of things there is, yes, there is likely an overlap there of this wasn't actually food reactivity. But when we dig deeper into like symptomology of each of these children, it actually roughly comes out to about 25% of them who really did have a non-IgE mediated food allergy, like your sons. And that's 1 in 4 babies. So that's pretty bonkers. That's a big number. And I think we'll see that number kind of like start to level out and make more sense as more people get educated on non-IgE mediated food allergies.
It seems like a big jump, but these have always been there. We just weren't now, like we didn't know the research behind it. Similar to probably like ties are, like oral restrictions are, you know, a lot of people are saying like, oh, they're just a fad, which I'm sure you probably hear this too. Like, oh, it's just a fad that someone has an allergy. And it's like, well, it's just, we know more, so we can do better because we know more. And it's not that those numbers have steadily increased. It's just, we didn't know about it before.
Yeah, and it's very common for me to talk to families, and once this starts happening in their home, for them to hear like, oh yeah, and then like my mother-in-law mentioned that my husband cried every day of, you know, like all the time in the first year of his life, and I'm like, okay, or had bloody stool or whatever it may be. So much more likely that it's always been close to this prevalent, and we have much higher awareness now. So then into the second part of your question, which,
Yes.
let's imagine, I'm dealing with my little, they're kind of fussy, they're a little bit gassy. I go into my medical provider and they say like cut dairy. Ugh, that's hard. And dairy, while like if that's not a part of your diet, that's fine. But it's a wonderful source of calcium and nutrients and calories for many of us. And just cutting it, quote unquote, just is not that easy. And and may not be necessary. So, for example, when I was told to cut this like laundry list of foods from my diet when we were like really dealing with egregious symptoms, I was told to cut these foods from my diet, and that I had to let my milk clear for 2 weeks. And I think that's like the most common thing if we're talking about misinformation that parents are told. And so I did this crazy thing. I went on this crazy massive elimination diet and I pumped like a mad woman while we fed her a hypoallergenic formula and just prayed that to the elimination diet gods that like we would get back to breastfeeding, because anyone who's been through that knows that like it's very highly likely you could lose your supply during that time.
Absolutely.
It's a very stressful time. You are jacking with your diet and caloric intake. And then on top of all of that, will baby go back to the breast after 2 weeks of straight formula? And so the probability of like really ruining the breastfeeding goals and relationship is really high when you do that to families. And the actual research doesn't support it. There's literally no publications that support any food staying in your breast milk for weeks on end. Zero. Which of course like made me a tiny bit upset on the other side of that crazy 2 weeks of my life. So what we actually see makes much more sense, and it matches all of the research behind like blood serum levels and things like that. So when you consume a food, it's going to spike in concentration a few hours after you ingest it and steadily plummet from there, usually gone within 8 hours and almost always gone within 24 hours. And this is if you're regularly removing breast milk. Right. And so that, and like I said, when we're looking at breast milk composition, it's made from blood, right? We know that our breast milk's made from blood. Anything in our bloodstream can transfer to the breast, most often at lower concentrations, but it can transfer. That's how we, give it many of its vitamins and nutrients, which is an amazing, wonderful thing. And I would also expand that to say that we're supposed to transfer the foods we eat too, right? We're supposed to expose baby to small portions of eggs and small portions of cow's milk and these small portions of actual dietary proteins that you're consuming. It's a good thing. So there's nothing wrong with you if your baby had food reactivity. You're supposed to do that. When we have reactions, it means that that portion of the protein that you're transferring happens to match your baby's portion of the protein that they're reactive to. That's what that means. And when I started digging more into the research behind this, what's fascinating is one, the misunderstanding between whole proteins versus these partial proteins. So you may see publications that are very splashy that say like, everyone's overdiagnosing food allergies because you don't transfer enough of the whole protein to elicit a response in any human. And the answer to that is like, that's correct. You are not. That would be real weird if you're transferring whole peanuts proteins to your boobs. Now, cool party trick if you could shoot peanuts out of your nipples, but like also probably painful. Not happening, right? Like we're breaking these proteins down significantly in order for them to be floating around in our bloodstream and end up in the breast tissue. So the answer to like those pieces, those reviews that are like, we don't transfer enough of this protein. You're right. In its whole form, we don't. We're transferring very small portions of the protein, which we're supposed to. And we know that they peak quickly, they clear quickly. What that means for families then in the realm of like trying to figure out, do I actually have to remove cow's milk protein? Do I actually need to be on an elimination diet or do I not? Is that means that you can figure this out much quicker than what many people will tell you, right? When they're like,
so crazy.
Well, you have to be off of dairy for like 2 months in order to Yeah, crazy
So
thing.
where did people come up with this about the 2 week thing? Or even like I heard you have to eliminate it for 2 weeks and then it stays in your baby system for up to 4 weeks. So like you can't give the milk for 4 weeks, like 2 to 4 weeks. Like I remember labeling my breast milk and being like, this milk has dairy in it or egg or whatever. So I have to throw this out completely. So where do you think that myth comes from?
I think that it's a few pieces, right? So I think there's this weird like Venn diagram or like iceberg of what occurred that led us to this. I think one is that there have been publications funded by specific companies in which it would behoove them for you to stop breastfeeding. And those publications will, for example, have put out a paper that said cow's milk protein found in breast 7 days after elimination, for example. And that's very splashy, right? And that's what the title says. But as a scientist, if you actually go read it, the limitations to that study specifically said this may not actually have even been cow's milk protein that we found. And it's at such low concentrations that my baby would have to have like 7 gallons of breast milk in one setting to elicit a response. And so, but they don't mention that in that big splash.
The title.
And so I think that's a piece, right? There's a piece of it that's this miscommunication behind like what is detrimental to the breastfeeding journey. The other piece is that it takes time for a baby to heal. And I think that's the other like kind of bigger side of the story is that, for example, if we like take breastfeeding completely out of the scenario and we just say like my body right now, if I had celiac, for example, right? So I'm reactive to gluten proteins. If I were to consume some bread and I have a reaction to the gluten in that bread, the bread itself and the gluten protein goes through my body pretty quickly, right? Like it's going to go through my gastrointestinal system, come out the other side fairly quickly, within a day, most often. However, the thing that we find in the bloodstream at an extended period of time is my reaction to, so the antibodies that my body created or the histamines that I increased or whatever it was that my body had the response to is the thing that is still in my bloodstream, is the thing that's still in my body. And I still have to heal from whatever reaction I had, right? So for example, for your little one consuming egg, we see a rash response fairly quickly because that's when they're exposed to it. Usually within a 48-hour window is when we'll see that kind of chronic reaction. And then we have to let it heal, right? Just because we're not continuing to give them egg doesn't mean that like the next day is a brand new baby. I wish that was the case, but the body has to heal. And so I like to use the analogy of like if you cut your hand, right? So if you cut your hand, and this is helpful as it relates to like blood and stool, especially. If I cut my hand and it was just a little bitty slice, there's like a tiny bit of blood, then oftentimes like the next day, like it's healed up, no big deal, but it's on my hand. So I might like, and with stool especially, it's rubbing against all the time, right? So like it might rub against it again, it might open it up. It might open it back up a little bit, things like that. But if I have a big reaction, right? If I'm very reactive to cow's milk protein and I just had a cheese
like
board,
your daughter with that, like
and we have
bloody
massive blood in stool, right? That's a gash, right? In comparison, that is a big gash that I can't go put a Band-Aid on, right? Like I wish I could like go up there and put a Band-Aid, but we can't. And it's being rubbed up against all the time, right? And so it's gonna heal, but it's gonna take time. And so for those who have like really egregious frank blood in stool, it can take weeks for those wounds to completely close and scar and heal over. And it's not that your body is still giving baby that protein. And it makes sense, like conceptually, if you're like, oh yeah, if the blood's going down and down and down, it must mean that like the protein's going down and down and down in my body. No, it just means that baby's healing, not that the protein's still in your body. And I think that's a bigger piece of like why there's so much confusion.
Yep. I think I love that analogy that you do with that, because I think it puts the image in parents' mind that you can still like, and go back to your scenario, like you can still breastfeed during this time. And even if you did a hypoallergenic formula, or even if your breast milk, if you eliminated it completely, it's still going to take time for your baby's gut to heal, and it's still going to go through this process. So it does not mean that anything's wrong. And we always, I think as parents, as moms, we always put it on us. Like, it's still my fault. So I should switch to the formula for the 2 weeks and just let it get out of my system. And it's like, but it would still happen. It's just, you're taking yourself out of the equation. So,
and I think one of the things that's really important to like state in the midst of all of that is, one, you absolutely can keep breastfeeding through it, right? So anytime that, and I so appreciate that you mentioned your own journey and like slips and all that fun stuff. It's like, you're human. It would be weird if you just magically knew all of the
or
things.
It's like,
right?
or it was like I went to a cookout and I didn't realize that my brother-in-law made his hamburgers with egg, kind of like you make like that's how he formed his burgers, as like a binder. Didn't realize that until the next day, and I'm like, oh, he's got a rash, like what did I eat? So, and of course, like all the guilt that comes with it, but I knew, like, I had Dr. Trill in the back of my head saying, it's okay, it's not the, like, it does not mess up, like it was one day and we just move on.
Just move forward, we follow baby. And so it's so important to just be like open and honest about those things, so that because it's so helpful for other people in the trenches of like, oh, Dr. Trill said that she was told that she had to remove corn from her diet, literally came home from the hospital and popped a bag of popcorn and ate half of it before she realized it was made out of corn. What? So you're not alone. So one, you can keep breastfeeding through a slip, right? Because it transfers and clears so quickly, it's even most likely that it's completely clear before you realize it, right? In your scenario, by the time you saw the rash,
it was already
those
gone.
Hamburgers are gone from your diet. So keep breastfeeding, because one, it's like you're not even there anymore. And two, your breast milk contains healing properties that are important for your baby. So not only can you like continue breastfeeding, and it provides comfort to your baby if they're in discomfort with their rash or their bloody stool or whatever it may be. It provides that comfort. It gives you a tangible thing you can do, right? Like, I can help my baby get through the other side of this. And the healing properties of your breast milk are so important to baby's next steps. And you're continuing to give them all those other proteins that you're consuming, which are good things, especially for a baby who has food reactivity. We want to expose them to the other things that don't cause them reactions. So keep breastfeeding.
Good. I love that. Okay. So I think we covered a lot. I mean, we covered a lot of ground today. So I just want to put out to our listeners, whether they're in the Triangle area or listening from afar, how can they get in contact with you if they've gone to a lactation consultant, we've ruled out sort of a latching thing, or if they're seeing those red flag signs and they're like, there is an allergy, but I want to continue breastfeeding, how can they get in contact with you and your team? Do you do consults, that sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So one, we have a food reactivity quiz on the homepage of our website that may be a really great resource for families. So if you're listening to this and you're like, that sounds familiar, but I'm not entirely sure, freetofeed.com, very front of the page, you can click on that. It's a free quiz. You get a free symptomology training from me if you're interested in it. So certainly check that out. It gives you a score based on the symptoms that you're dealing with. And then two, just like you mentioned, where I really relate to when you said it was so helpful just to be able to like message Dr. Trill and be like, hey, like, let's talk about mayonnaise, right? Or whatever it was.
So many times I'm like, oh, mayonnaise is at the top, tippy top. What? Like, that has the most amount of egg in it? Like, mind blown.
Why?
Mind blown. Like, I learned so much about food and its ingredients. You're good.
Pardon me.
I know. Everyone's got this. Yep.
One sec.
You're good.
So I relate so much to that because I remember in my journeys feeling so isolated, right? And alone. And like, there's no one to talk to. And I'm just in my crazy little brain, driving myself bananas. And so I wanted to create a space that would address that, right? Where families could be open and honest and loving and get that empathy. And so what we built is kind of twofold, where we have a food allergy support package, which is like a full 3 months of in-depth help, because that's typically the like timing that we see for like
For
really
sure.
diving in, especially with nuanced journeys. Usually we get to happy, healthy baby pretty quickly. But then like teasing out exactly like what's next steps and
Well, like
everything.
fine tuning, like that's what you and I went back
Yeah.
and did, like just fine tuning, you know, okay, how sensitive, like once we eliminated it, okay, when we feel like we can come back and fine tune and see how sensitive he actually is, which I think you can do, which was so empowering that it was like, I can eat some things with egg in it, but it has
Yeah.
to be in the right way. So,
Exactly. And that's one of like, I will shout this from the top of every mountain. I don't want you to eliminate anything that you don't have to, right? And really knowing exactly where you land is so empowering.
so
And
much.
so, and especially as it relates to things like egg, right? Where like they're in everything. Well,
Absolutely.
can
That
I
was
have,
harder. Like sometimes it was harder than cheese. Like I love cheese, but I had eggs every single morning. Like good source of protein, like easy to eat, grab a hard boiled egg, like
and even the
so
things that you're
hard.
like, why does this have egg in it? What
No.
purpose? What purpose
Like
is this
ranch
serving?
dressing, ranch dressing. Darn
Yep.
it.
Yep. And so, 100%, like really teasing that out and saying like exactly where do I land, is so empowering, because if you can have a baked egg, that changes your journey, right? It
For sure.
changes what you can
Mm-hmm.
consume as you're
Mm-hmm.
moving forward. And so getting to happy, healthy baby first is always our top priority, and then teasing out and really navigating exactly where do we land and what do we do next steps. And so that's what the food allergy support package does. It gives you 2 consults so that you can dive into elimination, reintroduction, confirmation, all those pieces. It gives you all of the educational material behind it. So it's actual like videos and PDFs,
Love it.
a full modules worth of like, this is what an allergen is. And here's some considerations for childcare. And here's a video that you can show your grandparents, right? Like,
Love it.
here's all of the like resources you need. And then on top of that, you get plugged into a direct chat with your food allergy expert. So you can do those like, hey, I ate a
Yes.
thing. Let's talk about this. Like, what do you think?
Mm-hmm.
Or we're in a reintroduction strategy, and like this is what their poop looks like today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so just having that direct messaging board to your food allergy expert, and then a community board is the other thing we have there, so that
Love
you
it.
can have community and talk to other families that are in the trenches with you and just be like, I miss cake, right? Or like, whatever, this sucks. Or whatever it is,
Like
wherever
a
you're
little
at,
bin
right? Then
sesh. Yep.
yeah. And like, oh, I found a new product. Like, check these guys out, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's a ton
Mm-hmm.
of that in our chat board. So that's the food allergy support package, is like all of that, all wrapped up into a package. And then we also have the like one-on-one consults that you can purchase by themselves if you want, depending on where your journey's at. Sometimes that's a better option. And our food allergy experts really range widely from we have lactation professionals, we have registered dietitians, we have registered nurses. They are food allergy families and have all of the like love and empathy that you really need right now,
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
listen to your journey and to validate you, and then just to educate you on like, this is what's happening in
Mm-hmm.
your body, baby's body. Here's your options. What do
Mm-hmm.
you want to do next? To empower
Absolutely.
you to say like, yeah, this is what I want to do next. And we support all feeding journeys. So the breastfeeding journey, formula feeding combo, getting to solids, everything and everything in between. And it has been so beautiful to honestly to be what I needed 7 years ago. I hear that
Mm-hmm.
often, like
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
said, like, I wish I knew you back when
I
my
know.
oldest. And I'm
Yeah.
like, girl, me too. So that is what we offer. We're also on all of the social media places.
Yeah. So
The
much information
most,
on her Instagram. So much
yeah,
information.
definitely check out our Instagram. That is where I'm most active, is on our Instagram page, free.to.feed. And we have an incredible blog that's also very, very valuable.
Awesome.
So check all those things out.
Yes, I love it. Yes. So if you are in these trenches, if you're if you had a baby previously that you think might have had something and you eliminated all these things and you didn't have Dr. Trill or her team, that's where you can be prepared if you are pregnant and expecting, and you're thinking you might have to go down this journey again, definitely get in contact with her. But thank you so much for coming on here. I even think, like, even though I knew all this stuff, I just love listening to you talk about it, because it's just, like you said, it's so empowering to be educated and then also, but supported too, and having that community that can be like, it's okay. And here's some really good non-dairy ice cream. Like you did for me, you brought me these, like the So Delicious bars. I became obsessed with them. They are so good. So there's lots of alternatives out there that, aren't dairy or aren't egg or aren't this or that, but are really good alternatives. So thank you for coming on. So if you guys go ahead and give her a follow on Instagram, go to her blog, go to her website. We'll put all of that in the show comments. And thank you, Dr. Trill. Hopefully I can see you soon and we can get together again when we aren't sick and have all the journeys and all of that.
Yes, exactly. Thank you so much, Courtney, for having me on, and thank you for the vital work that you do.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Use the code FLOCK10 at nurturenest.org for a discount on your first class.